Now I would like to basically set the scene a bit for our discussion today. And this is the reason why we have invited our two colleagues, Claire de Milano, Senior Legal Manager at ECAS, and Marit Westerwil, Citizens Advice Coordinator. As probably you already know, ECAS is managing a very important service on behalf of the European Commission called Europe Advice. We have a network of 60 legal experts in each and every member state covering all EU languages, and they provide legal advice to those citizens who exercise their rights of free movement or have a transnational component in the exercise of their rights where they are facing certain uncertainties or have encountered certain obstacles. So basically they can get in touch with our service, they can ask for legal advice. And only last year, this service provided legal advice to more than 20,000 European citizens. Normally, under Europe Advice, we can immediately see what are the problems encountered by EU mobile citizens across countries, issue-based, or at the EU level. So this is the reason why I thought it would be a very good idea if Claire can basically present some of the trends, last year trends, so that we can see a bit the big picture and be able after that, based on that, to zoom in and discuss each of those issues separately. So Claire, you have the screen, I would say, not really the floor, but the screen and the floor.
Just a second, I'm just going to share my presentation. It's a bit slow, sorry. So yes, thank you, Assya, for the presentation of the service. And I'm going to go directly to the main trends. So as Assya said, we are replying to 20,000 questions more or less per year. It goes from, I would say, a simple question of information to really requests of analyze of the EU law. We really provide a legal advice, and it can go from any kind of question. So it can go from the registration of a car in another country, residence rights, VAT, social security, or recognition of qualification. So as I said, last year, in 2021, of course, the COVID had really an enormous impact on the movement of citizens and, of course, in the kind of questions they asked. So the main topic in 2021 was social security. It was more than a quarter, so it's really, really a lot. Social security has always been an important topic for Europe Advice, but I must say last year the proportion was even more important. Then the second topic is residence rights. Then you can see entry procedure, taxes, and work. We reply to question to all the European citizens, but it was interesting last year. The first nationality was not an EU nationality, but the question came more from third country national who are family member of EU citizens, and usually their questions are related to entry rights and residence rights. Of course, it's also interesting to see that normally over the last years, the British nationality has always been the first one, and now, just after the Brexit, you can see that they are just in fourth position. And it's the same thing we can also see with the country concerned by the question sent from the citizen. So the first country now it's Germany, and then the question concerns Spain, Italy, France, Netherlands. And you can see that now United Kingdom is really, really a bit far compared to the other, while during years and years, United Kingdom has always been the first country of interest concerning the question that Europe Advice received. So if we go a bit deeper in the type of question we received, so as I said, social security was the main topic this year. Usually it concerns the difficulties in keeping a social security coverage when you move from a country to another, and also all the questions related to know which country is the competent one. And in this case, last year was also impacted by the COVID, and we got a lot of questions related to teleworking, and a lot of employees, but also employers ask us questions on the impact of the teleworking on the competent country concerning social security. Old age, also old age benefits, it's one of the most important issue for the citizens. It's mainly related, I would say, to Brexit. A lot of EU citizens living in UK or British citizens living in the EU wanted to know if the Brexit would have an impact on their benefits. And then, as I say, COVID. So over the whole year, we go through different steps. First, it was how to access to healthcare in the host country. Then it was how to access to vaccination. And if the vaccination you get in one country will be recognized in another one. And then we started to get a lot of questions concerning the European digital COVID certificate. Then we got a lot of questions concerning residence. It's mainly about the condition of the right to stay for family members. I must say there were really restrictive practice by national authorities. They asked more and more paper, and this has been even more complicated due to the COVID crisis. And then we have all the questions related to entry rights, and there really we could have seen that the COVID had an impact. How you can travel to a country, even just to move for holidays or to go to work in another country was really, really complicated last year. And we got also all the questions related to visa for the non-EU family members. I'm not going to go more in detail. I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Marit, who is going to give you the trend of the first 3 months of this year.
Thank you, Claire. So I will cover some important topics for 2022, namely COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, and Brexit. Can you go to the next slide, Claire?
Yes.
Thank you. So for COVID, we are expecting that the number of inquiries we are receiving will go down because the restrictions in the member states are being loosened. We saw in 2020, we had 672 eligible inquiries. Last year, it were 386. And so far, this year in January and February, we received 21 inquiries. So last year, the main topics were entry procedures, residence, and social security. For this year, it's entry procedures, residence, and on the third place is now work. Of course, it's still the beginning of this year, so it can change. Another important topic is now the war in Ukraine. We have received so far around 40 questions, of which 2/3 was eligible. And the main questions that are being asked are about entry procedures. How can an Ukrainian enter without a passport into the EU? And also residence rights, how to apply for residence, how long can a person stay. We are receiving questions from Ukrainian citizens, but also from Russian citizens. Then we also received some ineligible inquiries. Mainly it are complaints about the sanctions that the EU has taken against Russia. And we also received some questions about how to adopt a Ukrainian child, which does not fall within the scope of Europe advice. Then a last topic I will cover is Brexit. We make a distinction between the EU citizens in the UK and UK nationals in the EU. So for January and February of this year, the main concerns of EU citizens living or working in the UK were the social security rights, pension and unemployment benefits, their entry rights and residence rights. And for UK nationals living or working within the EU, it were the residence rights on the first place, followed by entry rights and then social security. So this was very brief, some topics for 2022. If you want to submit a question yourself to Europe Advice, you can see the link here on the slide. And we are also happy to answer any questions you might have afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire and Marit. As you see, dear colleagues, the moment when something happens in Europe, and not only Europe, but in the world, which impacts Europe, because of course we are a global economy and also society, we see immediately through the surveys. Unfortunately, the questions of Ukrainian and also Russian citizens, most of them are ineligible because the service covers EU citizens, but nevertheless, of course, we have informed the Commission about this type of questions, and now we are reporting on a daily basis on the nature of those questions, because through the service or in any additional way, apparently the concerns and also the questions of those citizens needs to be addressed, and I think that the Commission is doing that. So thank you very much once again, and now I would immediately ask Julie Bishop, who is the director of the Law Center Network. They are members, they operate in the UK, and they have been very, very active and still are in helping EU citizens, especially those from marginalized communities to basically benefit from this settling scheme. I know, Julie, that you have been monitoring the situation. You have issued a report on that. Not very positive, so we will be really very interested to hear your expert opinion about what is going on there, because also we see that this is still quite a substantial part of the inquiries of Europe Advice. So the issue is here, it hasn't disappeared, right?
That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much, and hi everyone, and thanks for the chance to speak. Not at all surprised by that data you presented, Claire and Marit. Look, I'm going to give a very brief overview within the time, but please do ask questions if you need. I'm going to talk about three groups of people: those who have settled status, those who have pre-settled status, and people who are in vulnerable situations. But just to start and remind everyone that simply just 9 months ago, exactly on the 30th of June, 2021, there were over 5 million. Initially, they thought it was 3 million, but it turned out to be 5+ million EU and EEA nationals living in the UK. On the 30th of June, they were legally living, working, accessing services, healthcare, education. On 1 July, that changed. Their lives became precarious. Even for the 3 million citizens who had settled status, free movement in and out of the UK, access to housing, employment, healthcare, social services and benefits all became precarious. And just for those of you who aren't quite sure of the terms, most of you will know, but settled is if you've lived for 5 years in the UK. Pre-settled is anything up to 31st of December 2020, less than 5 years. So they're the two categories, and everything within the Brexit system is based on settled or pre-settled. Now, there are two policies that predate Brexit, indeed possibly part of the reason that led to Brexit, that has led to this precarious situation. And it's not simply the settled status system. Number one is the hostile environment. I'm sure most of you would be aware that the UK government's immigration policy was named, its official name is called the hostile environment. And what that's based on is making the UK an unattractive place to live. Now, many of you may smile at that, but the UK, the British government, doesn't think that's ironic, that they want to make it an unpleasant place to live. Anyhow, the way that works is that all service providers have become border guards. So that means if you send your child to school, you apply to a university, you rent a house, you apply for a job, regardless of where you come from, you must provide proof of the right to reside in the UK. This is everyone, whether you've been there 10 years, 50 years, it doesn't matter. The problem for people with settled status in the UK who remember illegally living and working here is for them to provide their right to reside. There is no physical proof of that. It is a code. There is no hard copy. Their status is a digital status that sits on their passport. And so the school, the doctor, whoever can't access that. So what you have to do in order to provide your proof of right to reside is go onto the Home Office website, into what's called their View and Prove system. Great name. Most people Google it, they find out how to get a share code. However, the share code is only valid for 90 days, so you have to go back again. And of course, the whole system is in English. Now, the fact that it is a digital code, all of you will be immediately understanding the difficulty of accessing that on sometimes quite a regular basis. The second part of it is that the only place your code, your digital status resides is on the Home Office website. That means the Home Office, their database is the guardian alone of your status in the UK. Now, many of you will have heard of the Windrush scandal, which is part of the hostile environment, and it's where the UK denied rights to citizens from the Caribbean who'd been living in the country for years. Why did that happen? Because the Home Office threw out their records, threw them out, decided they didn't need them anymore. So 5 million people in the UK are now hopeful that the Home Office doesn't decide to throw out all their records, have a computer glitch, who knows what. There is no physical proof, and this is the number one vulnerability for people living in the UK. If you lose your passport, get a new passport, etc., you have to go through the process again as an individual. Now, I'm an Australian citizen living in the UK. I get a card. If you come from other countries, you get a card, but you don't if you're from the EU. The second problem, or the second risk, major risk, is for people who have pre-settled status. There are 2.2 million people living in the UK with pre-settled status. They still have all the rights and benefits if they can prove their status, accessing their digital code. But the risk here is that you must reapply and nobody reminds you. So when your 5 years comes up, if you don't remember to reapply, you go back to the beginning. You must remember. You have to reapply not just for yourself, but for each of your children. We know where that's going. There is no one to remind them. There is no digital reminder. The next thing about this is that you can imagine how the digital, the pre-settled, the lack of reminders, the lack of interface plays out with people who are vulnerable, whose lives are vulnerable. And remember, the report Assya's talking about was really examining what it was digging in to who are the vulnerable EU citizens living in the UK. And one of the key findings of that report is that it's very easy for people's life circumstances to change. So there are the digital hurdles for people with no email, no telephone, keeping track of applications, etc., is very difficult. The third thing is that 300,000 plus people still haven't applied for their status. And once they are able to apply, many reasons for that: lost paperwork, slow response by embassy, by consulates, etc. However, now the deadline's closed, it is the sole discretion of the Home Office, the person you contact, whether or not you're allowed to apply. So we have 300,000 people who are now illegal, but 9 months ago they were legal, and it's the discretion of a single person in the Home Office as to whether or not you can apply late for your status. This is a system that has been designed for people with settled lives, as the name implies, but rather you need to think about it. The system is designed for educated, middle-class people with easy lives who are highly digitally literate. My colleague who's on the call, who is one of those people, just fell foul of the system herself after visiting her family in Germany just a few weeks ago. Hence the conclusion that this digital system only entrenches inequality. Having to reapply is problematic. So much is on the discretion of the Home Office, so much we have to trust the Home Office, who has proved itself untrustworthy. So, colleagues, we're watching a train crash happening. This is going to continue to unfold, and the people who have made their home, the 5 million plus people from EEA countries and the EU who've made their homes in the UK, are living now on a knife edge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for this extensive overview, not a rosy one, unfortunately, but this also reinforces certain convictions of ours as well. This will be mentioned at a later stage. We have basically formed a big coalition within the Convention for the Future of Europe, working on digital transformation that leaves no one behind, because it's a very, very important issue, not only for the European Union, but for everyone these days, just because technology could be a blessing, but also could be a curse for those who do not have access to it or do not know how to use it. Thank you so much. And now I will immediately invite Ms. Simona Barbu to take the floor. She is representing FEANTSA here, the European network of working with homeless people. I know how important their work are. We collaborate with them, and I know that they can give us a very, very good overview of another underrepresented and group very often in trouble when it comes to freedom of movement. So Simona, please, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Assya. I hope you can hear me well and see my PowerPoint. It's okay?
Perfectly okay, yes.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. As Assya said, my name is Simona and I'm representing FEANTSA. I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective and the issues that have affected mobile EU citizens living in destitution during the pandemic. I would just briefly present us, for those of you who do not know FEANTSA. We are a European coalition working to end homelessness in Europe. We have over 120 members in Europe, and we work thematically. One of the big areas of our work is focusing on free movement, and we have started doing this work already 10 years back, when many of our members have met mobile EU citizens in their services. In the past almost 5 years, this work has been conducted under the project, with its entire name, Protecting the Rights of Destitute EU Mobile Citizens, with funding from the European Programme on Integration and Migration, and also in collaboration with ECAS. And we'll probably hear more about this later on. I will not go too much into details on reasons why mobile EU citizens actually are pushed into homelessness. The time is short today, so I prefer to focus on the actual impact of COVID-19, but I will make the slides available, and I do want to mention that many reasons have to do with restrictive practices of member states and the way that they choose to implement, to transpose the European legislation. And as well about that, we have written a policy paper together with ECAS colleagues, which we are happy to share. So yeah, without further ado, I will just present to you what were the main areas where mobile EU citizens experiencing homelessness were affected by COVID-19. And I would just like to start with this quote, which I selected because I found it very representative of many issues that people have been affected in this period. It is from a mobile EU citizen in Denmark, which is a beneficiary of one of FANTSA members, and he talks about not having access to disinfectant gel, not having enough money to buy masks. So prevention was very difficult for people experiencing homelessness in this period. He says, I was all alone. They told everybody they had to go home, to go inside, to stay inside. I was thinking, where is that for me? So we can see that people who slept rough had a really hard time to actually comply with preventive measures and with health guidelines that the governments put out. The impact on mental health was also huge on mobile EU citizens experiencing homelessness across Europe, as they were constantly reminded that they didn't have a home, and depression in this period has indeed increased. Yes, so the hashtag stay home was not possible, but and people sleeping rough in this period, I think it's important to say that they have been also fined for being on the streets outside the curfew, the hours that were imposed by governments for people not to be on the streets. But at the same time, those who lived in communal spaces also had suffered a lot. We know that there was a big movement, especially in the lockdown periods, where homeless people were housed in dormitories, and everybody was sheltered from the virus. But at the same time, it was difficult for people to live in these environments because these places oftentimes did not allow for social distancing or isolation in case it was needed, and the shared air did not have the best quality. Furthermore, the possibilities for people to earn money also reduced. Many of mobile EU citizens living in the institution relied on informal jobs or on menial jobs, so they were not able to access this. Some lost their jobs as well, and that meant an increased risk of homelessness. And at the same time, I can recognize the challenges that were mentioned earlier in relation to digitalization and linguistic issues. And these challenges made it harder for people to access social protection or services because suddenly they did not have the same possibility of support from the homelessness sector, so they couldn't access services. Also, last but not least, discrimination increased in this period, and it was the case especially for when people return to origin country, as some of them were forced to do, and particularly in the case of people belonging to Roma communities, they were met with an increased wave of hate speech and blaming, they were seen as virus carriers, and so they were very strictly treated. Yes, so very shortly as well on the impact of COVID-19 on homelessness service providers. When what concerns this, the services had to go through an important adaptation process. Initially, they experienced a lot of confusion because they did not have specific guidelines from the authorities. Some of them had to also close because they saw big risks for people actually contracting the virus within the services. But in time, they learned how to work in the new circumstances. So they managed to support people after the initial shock period. However, the staff was quite impacted by the health crisis. There were reports of stress and burnout. There was insufficient funding, which meant also difficulties in paying salaries and a lack of staff, as many people had to either stay home to take care of their children following the closure of public services, but also many of those working in service providers or volunteers in belonging to the at-risk group because they are retired people over the age of 60. It was also said that the roles of the personnel has changed in this period, and they could not continue with their counseling activities, which they normally do to help people to support them exiting homelessness and access the labor market. So it was quite difficult. Yes, and to summarize and also to contribute very shortly on the discussion of moving forward, I think from FEANTSA, we also see a positive impact of the pandemic, if I can say so, which is that it has showed us what can be done when political will is there. And for mobile EU citizens experiencing homelessness, this meant that bold and creative measures were implemented to protect them in front of the virus. Policies at national level were promising, and I'm sorry, they allowed for the first time to accommodate thousands of people who were sleeping rough. And we have seen different hotels or public buildings being transformed for this purpose. And these examples from our very own Brussels, we have several cases where mobile EU citizens who experienced homelessness have been housed in this period, and then they managed to stabilize their situation. They managed to get regularized status and access jobs. So now they are able to, to manage independently. So therefore, to conclude, we hope that under EU support and coordination, using funding and policies at European level, we can use the pandemic lessons to create a better, more sustainable and fairer EU, as the event today is calling for as well. That was it from me. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to discuss or take questions later.
Thank you, Simona. Thank you really very much. It was very useful, and thank you for ending on a positive note. We, of course, are all aware that a lot needs to be done in order to make this wishful thinking a reality. But still, I mean, now I think there is at least a light in the tunnel, so to say, after those 2 years. Now we have a very interesting speaker with us, who is Mr. Dimitris Kyriazanos. He's associate researcher in the Institute of Informatics and Telecommunications of the National Center for Scientific Research in Greece. And I can tell you that we are very, very happy and lucky to be part of a consortium, Horizon 2020 consortium, that he's leading, who is going to look into and study the potential impact of artificial intelligence. I mean, the project focuses primarily on law enforcement and fundamental rights protection. We, of course, as a citizen-centric organization, are very, very interested on the potential impact of artificial intelligence on citizens' rights. And I'm really, really happy that Dimitri has agreed to join us today in order to provide some initial insights, because this 2-year Horizon 2020 project has just started a couple of months ago. So basically, we are at the beginning of a very exciting journey. But for sure, I suppose Dimitri will have much more to share next year on the outcomes and the lessons learned from this project. So please, you have the floor and the screen at your disposal.
Thank you very much, Assya, for, of course, first for inviting, but also for the excellent introduction. And this saves me quite some time from from my intervention. Let me check. Yes, to begin with, and Assya already gave you an insight on the PopAI project, where we also have the pleasure to be partners with the European Citizen Action Service. I will not go into the details of it right now. I want to focus on the points of today's panel and to stimulate the discussion. I would just like to mention that, of course, this is a project which is very much in the heart and in line with EU's strategy and strategic plan on artificial intelligence. And an important aspect, of course, of it is a sustainable and inclusive European artificial intelligence view and approach in law enforcement, which is, of course, a domain where there is much controversy and and also an interface to citizens and citizen rights. So in this context, PopAI is part of a dedicated cluster of projects, which was in a call in the last year of Horizon 2020, aiming to produce a pandect of recommendations for the ethical use of AI for law enforcement authorities. And of course, we will be happy to give you more insights as we progress. This is a project which has started October 2021, around for 2 years. So please, let's connect and let's be in touch now that we have also this opportunity to get acquainted today. Starting from this ground and from civil security and law enforcement, so also handled in PopAI, we started with, of course, creating a taxonomy of what exists right now and what is also part of the forthcoming research and deployments in the law enforcement, and creating a map of controversy issues throughout the entire ecosystem. It is also an important aspect of including all stakeholders in the process. And just to mention a specific case, of course, AI is already many AI tools are already in use, and they're, of course, a very important tool for against child exploitation, terrorism, trafficking, and crime detection. And there's a series of technologies already in use. Having said that, we did have, of course, controversial or even unlawful cases, unlawful use of such tools. This was the case also in Sweden last year, where we have the use of Clearview AI, which was it's a very controversial app, to say the least, for using facial recognition and the AI, powered by 3 billion photos of people taken from the public internet. And this was, of course, a case where this was the whistle was blown from the Swedish Data Protection Authority, and this was a case which was identified. So, of course, we have to remain vigilant in terms of the ethical, the legal, and technological issues, and also keep the stakeholders involved in the development and implementation of such tools. Having said that, when we say the stakeholders, I would say the entire ecosystem. This is why PopAI is also aiming for a zero-sum game approach. So it's not a trade-off. It's not we aiming to bring this together, and aiming for a situation where civil society, NGOs, and citizens, together with practitioners and the AI research and the ethical legal experts, through a cross-disciplinary process, provide the necessary, let's say, directions for the correct and ethical use of AI in Europe. Also extending to today's discussion more and in terms of AI, democracy and the EU citizenship as we proceed, I would like to highlight, let's say, a few important aspects of that are connected with AI. And of course, there has been many initiatives such as the EU AI Act on the on the prohibited and even high-risk AI systems. We have an important point there that we have to be careful when it comes to algorithmic bias and discrimination in AI applications. This also affects vulnerable groups, mentioned also by Simona previously, and this is especially identified as a risk for such discrimination. Also, from the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence, there is sentiment analysis, deepfakes, and AI technologies. We did have, of course, the Cambridge Analytica and the presidential elections of 2016, and this was already 7 years ago. So we're talking about this exponentially grown power of processing and the knowledge of the decisional history of people and how this may affect. And of course, COVID-19 extraordinary measures. There was also in a few EU member states there was a heated debate on some of the measures and some of the more, let's say, strict measures on it. Credit rating systems, they're already in place. They have been around, for example, credit card systems and health insurance rating systems. And there was also recently in Germany, there was a situation where was quoted, are we sleepwalking towards such systems? Concluding, and of course, this is a challenge discussion, so it's a bit more green, but indeed, AI, in essence, it's an optimization, it's a methodology for optimizing problem solution, and we want our problem solved, and there are many benefits of using AI in our society. Having said that, there are human supervision, strongly powers which are needed. The algorithms have to be transparent, traceable, and sufficiently documented and disconnected also with bias and fairness of the algorithms. And of course, let's not forget the principles of necessity and proportionality. And if I have to conclude with a very important point for citizens and also connected with Julie's highlighted on digital literacy, awareness, and improved and inclusive digital literacy and critical thinking is mandatory to apply it across EU citizens and across all aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. I just want to point out that basically our role in this project would be also to run some of the controversies through citizens' debates and debates with different stakeholders. So what is lying ahead somehow are a couple of policy labs that we'll be organizing together with local partners at the national level. And all of this will come together in a Brussels-based face-to-face. Hopefully, we're almost sure now about that. Yes, Policy Lab, where we are going to present and debate with all of you basically the conclusions. It will take place at a certain point at the beginning of next year. So I'm really looking forward to this project because somehow I believe that the only way in which organizations like ours can really bring themselves up to date with what is happening in the technological front, which is so rapidly developing, is if we joined projects like this, where we have the practitioners, we have the academics, and everything is like learning by doing and cooking it up as we go. So yes, I'm very happy about this project, I have to admit, and looking forward to it. And now, because as we saw, as a result of the fact that the UK have left the Union, now we have Germany as the country with the highest number of EU mobile citizens residing there. We also have Germany as the country which we see through Europe Advice coming up with more issues problematic issues, including as well as more and more questions concerning Germany and from German citizens. And here we have the pleasure to have today with us Ms. Carolin Rapp. She is from the Department of Political Science of the University of Copenhagen, and I know that they have conducted a very interesting experiment there. I can't wait basically to see the conclusions and the results, and I hope that this will be also a very nice background setting for what we will share a bit later with Omri and Owen with you, which would be the results of the core narrative change campaign in Germany as well. So I hope that now we will hear from Carolin why also we afterwards selected Germany for our experiment as well. So please, you have the floor, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope the sound is okay. So what I'm presenting is a joint work with, as you can see, a few others, and we're changing a little bit this perspective, what we've been talking about until now. So it's more about discrimination or preferential treatment of mobile EU citizens in a bureaucratic setting. So these are actually two papers I will very briefly present. The first one, this is actually the second one, because our research fell into the COVID-19 crisis, into the lockdown in Germany. Why, or maybe you're interested in why did we select Germany? First of all, there are many mobile EU citizens, and we had also access to a survey there. So this was the first reason, and we also aim at doing what we did here in other countries. So what we were interested in the first paper, so I will give you a little bit of background on that one, can we find discrimination against mobile EU citizens in a bureaucratic setting? You could say, like, what we started with, like bureaucratic discrimination, this is something that is, or preferential treatment is something that is researched a lot in the US. It is mainly based on ideas of skin color, religion, and so on, that we see discrimination. And we thought, well, mobile EU citizens is a special case. They, on paper, in most countries, or at least in our case and in Germany, have the same rights. So we thought, well, we look at a very unlikely case to detect discrimination. So why is it an unlikely case? First and foremost, there is this presumed formalistic personality of bureaucrats. So bureaucrats, especially in the German case, the German bureaucracy is quite well known. There's a longer education there, that you're supposed to not, or to treat everyone in the same way. So this is why we thought the German case is a very special case, but in general that we know that bureaucrats are trained to not discriminate. However, there is ample evidence showing that we are facing bureaucratic discretion and discrimination in different countries. In the German case, there are also examples for the Swiss case, for the US case, and so on. So there is actually bureaucratic discrimination happening. And also here, maybe what does bureaucratic discrimination mean? That you prefer one person over another when you, for example, distributing welfare benefits or other things, childcare spots, and so on. So this is what we understand as that. And why is it also an unlikely case? There is a freedom of movement within the EU, and mobile EU citizens are allowed or have the right to certain welfare benefits if they, for example, all work in the country and so on. So why would we expect that two citizens or two EU citizens are treated differently? We saw things happening within the EU, European Union. The Eastern enlargement increased the diversity within the EU. That also increased the cultural dissimilarity maybe of EU citizens. And we also saw examples like Brexit, where the freedom of movement was challenged, or was an issue actually for EU citizens. And maybe on a more methodological side, that's not so important for today, I guess, is how do we detect discrimination? How can we do this in a bureaucratic setting? So usually researchers did this by sending out fake emails or fake, most of the times it was actually fake emails asking bureaucrats, street level bureaucrats, for something specific, and then testing how long did it take until they responded and the tone of it. But this is facing quite critical ethical issues at the moment, because it takes a lot of time away from street level bureaucrats that should actually handle cases in time. And moving to the COVID-19 pandemic, well, we thought like, well, why should we detect discrimination? It could be also due to the pandemic. We saw borders closing. There was more national solidarity towards the own nation, and not like EU solidarity in general. And one could also say that there was more threat perceptions, especially when you think about the outbreak in the Italian case, that there were more negative attitudes towards Italians, that we thought maybe this also translate into increased discrimination in these bureaucratic scenarios. How did we do this? Very briefly, we had a survey experiment. For the first part, we had roughly 3,000 general public respondents plus 700 respondents from the public administration. So we could also compare the general public with those who went through the education, or the education to be a street level bureaucrat. And in the second survey, so the first one was in the beginning of March 2020, and the second one, where we tested COVID effect, that was in mid-April, also in Germany, with roughly 1,000 respondents. This was the setup. We mainly focused on the social benefits example. This is the one used in many other researchers use that, asking, well, should this candidate or should this applicant receive a benefit? And if you were forced to decide between those two, who would or who should receive the benefit? Here we chose one nationality that was more culturally close to the German one, Dutch, and another one that was more further away, Romanian. Then we also distinguish between the genders, so also controlling for whether if there's a bias based on gender, on language, on the job individuals have, as well as on the age. We can always discuss like, is this the best setup or not? But this is the setup we had. And what did we find out? What were our questions and what were our answers in the end? So a first question we had was, do bureaucrats discriminate against certain groups of EU citizens? And even though it's the least likely case, and we found out, yes, in quite a large extent. So language proficiency, if you speak German fluently, you have almost a 110 higher percentage chance to receive a benefit, or that your case will be handled by the street level bureaucrat, as well as when you're more culturally similar. So a Dutch citizen has a roughly 44% higher chance that his or her case will be handled more quickly than someone from Romania. So our expectation was that we see maybe a 10% impact of the nationality, because we thought this is the least likely case, discrimination based on nationality compared to religion or skin color. But we saw this 44% increase, even in the bureaucratic sample where individuals are educated to not discriminate. Our second question was, are patterns of bureaucratic discrimination distinct from the society at large? And they are not. So bureaucrats, street level bureaucrats, act in the same way as the general population. So we can expect that the general population, the effects are the same, as well as in this bureaucratic population we had in our sample. So the education does not, or going through this education does not change something. What we had in these experiments, we had an accountability measure trying to look at, can we reduce discrimination by asking the respondents, 50% of the respondents, whether or that they have to justify their decision. It actually did not reduce discrimination. So we're still working on looking at which kind of measures could reduce this kind of discrimination. And lastly, maybe the most important question here is, did the COVID-19 pandemic increase discriminatory behavior? And it did not. So we actually succeeded in publishing a paper with a so-called null finding. So we don't find anything. COVID-19 did not change a thing. It could be because the discrimination was already on such a high level, or that our survey was maybe a bit too early. It was in April 2020, so it was after the first lockdown in Germany. So the already existing pattern was the same after the first lockdown. So in sum, we find a relevant degree of discrimination. So it is quite a high degree, but two questions mainly remain. So why is this discrimination considerably high, and how can we actually reduce it? So due to COVID-19, our research group, we couldn't travel and meet. So this is why we had some more money left and did a third survey now that we're currently working on, where we test different reducing mechanisms. So we also test a perspective taking measure for reducing discrimination. And the other question is, why did the corona crisis did not have an effect? As I mentioned before, it could be due to the timing of our survey. It could also be due that the levels of discrimination or preferential treatment were already so high in this context. So it was higher than we actually expected. So this was a very brief overview of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolin. This is very, very interesting and a lot of food for thought, basically, because there are open questions here, right? About what exactly we can do in order to decrease discrimination, because if this is the attitude of those who are enforcing the legal norms, so we can imagine about all the others, no? So this is a very interesting finding. It also touches upon one of the questions that I saw Julian has posted in the chat, Julian from Sovi. So she is asking how exactly we can raise information, but also awareness and maybe the capacities of the administration at national level, those who are on a daily basis dealing with the rights of your mobile citizens and on whom they depend. I mean, here what I can say is what ECAS is planning to do, also some of it together with FANTSA in the upcoming year. So first we are waiting for the structured guidelines of the European Commission on the Freedom of Movement Directive. I'm sure we'll hear about the timing, hopefully the content as well a bit later in the next panel from the DG Just representative. And then we plan to basically come up with a series of training modules that we are going to pilot in 6 countries, those countries where we have the highest number of your mobile citizens. And meanwhile, we are working on a training model addressing some of the issues that we figured out and identified as a result of last year, also COVID-related situation concerning teleworking. Because as Claire mentioned, teleworking appeared to be quite a challenge related to social security, but not only, and a bit of an unknown territory, a new thing in our lives, both for employees and employers. So we thought that it may be basically useful to really to have a training model on that as well. So we are working on that as we speak. Yes, so here I also see a response from Sibyl as well to everyone. And there is a question, so maybe you would like to very briefly take it on board, Carolin, and just respond to it about the cultural proximity. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the culture, yes. So I wrote a brief response. So in the conjoint setup, so what you saw, the respondent did not only receive one of this setup, they received 6 of them, and 6 for each of the 2 scenarios. So one scenario was the welfare benefit, the other one was the electoral rights. And in these conjoint setups, we can control for all of the other factors. So there's always a different combination. And we have 6 answers for each respondent times 3,700. So we can estimate out of this in which combinations which of these factors, gender, education, job level, actually makes a difference. So we can estimate these percentage changes and the influences. So we also see that age does not play much of a role. Gender does play a little bit of a role where females are preferred over males. especially in the welfare benefit setup. And job, what was a job level? Doctors are in the electoral rights. Doctors scenario, in the electoral rights scenario, doctors are preferred over nurses, but in the welfare benefit scenario, it's the other way around. But it is especially the language and the nationality that pointed out. So the other things, they make a difference between 1 and 10% percentage points, whereas, as I said, the language is a 110 percentage change and nationality 44 percentage points. So these are the most important ones, so they stick out.
Thank you very much. So I would suggest that basically we just take 5 minutes of a break, just to take a glass of water or a cup of coffee, and then we come back. We are going to be brief in terms of a presentation with Owen and with Omri, so that we can have also in the upcoming panel, like at least 10-15 minutes for discussion. Would it be fine and okay with everyone? Okay, so see you in 5 minutes.